Hi everyone, this is May On from Sotheby's International Realty. I like to introduce to you the new Broker Compensation Advisory Form, which is designed to provide clarity and transparency in real estate transactions. This new advisory form is intended to help both sellers and buyers understand the nuances of broker compensation, ensuring all parties are well informed throughout the process. Let's dive into the details and see how this advisory works for both sellers and buyers. Number 1. When sellers list their property for sale through a real estate broker, they agree to pay the seller's broker when escrow closes. Part A. Listing agreement compensation is fully negotiable. When a seller enters into a listing agreement with a broker, the seller authorizes the broker to find a buyer for the seller's property and agrees to pay the seller's broker if a buyer is found who purchases the property. Compensation amounts are not fixed by law and are fully negotiable between the seller and the seller's broker. When negotiating compensation, the parties may discuss factors such as the broker's expertise and experience, the type of broker services to be performed, and the broker's time and expenses, among other considerations. Part B. Optional additional compensation if buyer is unrepresented. A listing agreement may include optional additional compensation amounts owed to the seller's broker for situations where the broker takes on additional responsibilities or workload. Sometimes a buyer may not be working with nor want to be represented by a real estate broker. When that happens, the seller's broker is not required to represent the buyer, and the seller and seller's broker may decide that they do not want to create such a relationship. In those situations, the seller's broker is advised to use a buyer non-agency form to inform the buyer that the seller's broker will be acting on behalf of the seller only and not act as the buyer's agent throughout the transaction. However, because the buyer is unrepresented, the seller's agent will inevitably have to do more work to facilitate the transaction. A seller may agree to compensate their broker for the additional work in such cases. Part C. Broker may represent both buyer and seller dual agency. California law allows a brokerage company to represent both seller and buyer in a real estate transaction. At the time, the agent, on behalf of a brokerage, obtains the signature of a seller on a listing agreement. The agent will not, in most cases, know who the eventual buyer will be for a seller's property. Similarly, at the time an agent, on behalf of a brokerage, obtains the signature of a buyer on a buyer representation agreement, the agent will not, in most cases, know who the eventual seller will be for a property the buyer wants to buy. Because many individual licensees may work through one brokerage company and some individual licensees work with many buyers and sellers, there is a possibility that the same brokerage company will represent both buyer and seller in a transaction. If licensees working through broker represent both seller and buyer, broker is allowed to receive compensation from each, provided the seller and buyer are advised of the relationship and the total amount of compensation the broker will receive.